Lux Occult is a part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
3, Roman, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7,
When I go from this place, dress the porch with garlands as you would for a wedding, my dear. Pull the people from their homes and dance in the streets. When death arrives like a bride at the aisle, send me off in my brightest clothing. Serve ice cream with rose petals to our guests. There's no reason to cry, my dear. I have waited my whole life for such a beauty to take my breath away. When I go, let it be a celebration. For I have been here. I have lived. I have won at this game called life. That is Funeral by Rupi Kaur. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent topics. Exploring the intersection of magic, art, science, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic, this is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you, if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I do not speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree with the things that I say or that I guess say on the show sometimes. How would we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things after all anyway? And like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I often revise my thoughts and opinions about things based on new evidence. Alright, I'm very excited to be presenting two great conversations to you all today. First up, I spoke with Cressida Stone, author of the book Secrets of Santa Muerte. We talk about some of the most common colors the skeletal form of Santa Muerte can be seen adorned with, and what the magical significance of these are. We talk about red Santa Muerte, white Santa Muerte, as well as about the goddess of death as she is adorned in her black robes. There are other colors and magical associations that we don't cover in today's conversations, but that you can check out in Cressida's book. We also do a little bit of myth busting about the types of people who follow Santa Muerte and talk about some of the intersections between my patroness Hecate and Santa Muerte. During an episode within an episode, we'll hear from a practitioner who wishes to remain anonymous about some of the things he feels he's learned the hard way in his magical practice. Conversations like this can be really valuable to share, so I'm really appreciative of this person being willing to come on the show and tell us all about that. We're going to be calling him Zephod Bedelbrax, which is a fun shout out to one of my favorite IPs. I'll also share an update about what we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project, which is a large-scale group working you can be a part of, as well as Void House, our newest adventure in creating a consent-forward space in which to conduct magical work both in person and online, as well as providing consent education to the magically inclined and investigating the magical, healing, and alchemical properties of consent. Thanks so much to everybody who attended our Magic and Consent workshop on the 14th and 15th of September, and to the Consent Academy for putting all of that together. There's a lot of great stuff in there that I think will help people approach a variety of different magical practices in ways which have the potential to be the most beneficial to them. There was some stuff about doing shadow work that I've been reflecting on a lot since the workshop, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it more. We had a really cool conversation the other day about it too. Recordings of the workshop are now available to watch for free. They're posted on the Green Machine Discord server and will be there for around a month or so do not delay if you're interested in checking those out. You can hit me up for a link to the server if you'd like. Students of both magic and consent practices might be able to identify some places in the story Zephod will share with us today later during the episode within the episode, where being aware of concepts like capacity and how that can impact our decision-making might have been helpful for avoiding trouble. It's sometimes true that the only way to learn something is the hard way, and that's kind of just one of those facts of life. But the fewer times we need to beat ourselves up rediscovering wheels that others have already discovered, the more time we can spend doing other things that hopefully maybe won't beat us up. We have a lot of great stuff to get into here today, but before we do, let me remind you that if you like the show and you like what I've been getting into here, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me, and there are no tiers or levels, so give as you will. I will send you an MP3 of your bibliomancy reading after about a month when Patreon charges your card for the first time. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who has been doing any of these things. Your support really makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the wild amount of time I spend. I really appreciate the opportunity to be doing this, so thank you so much for making that possible. Although I'm quite introverted and I don't use social media very much, I'm not there like checking stuff out every day or anything like that, but it certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing, fucking rad listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, and accept no substitutes. I will never reach out to you with offers of services or products. When I ask for money, it will sound like the Patreon thing you heard a second ago. Okay, concepts like the power of devotion come up for me often in my magical practice as I continue to explore deity work, finding interesting new depths as I go. I began as a very agnostic person who had a hard time kind of connecting with the idea of personified power the way that I saw other people around me doing so. There are some people in my life who have what feels to them like a very real and concrete relationship with divinity, mostly with people like Jesus and stuff, since this is the sort of like default which everybody is exposed to in our culture. But I wanted to know what it was like to have that type of a connection. I had to do it like on my own terms, so come to it in a manner that made sense to me in order for that to be something that was feasible. So Hecate's helped me out a lot with this work, and with many other things besides. I've discovered a lot of interesting things about myself and about the world through investigating this, so I feel very grateful for that, and it's actually a real joy to serve her in this manner, right? Like, it's this sort of like type of pleasure that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise, which is also another interesting and cool thing that I feel grateful for. When I read Cressida's book, Secrets of Santa Muerte, it was apparent to me that she's gone on a very like intense and interesting spiritual journey through discovering and developing her relationship with Santa Muerte. She's traveled extensively as part of this and made pilgrimages to many of Santa Muerte's shrines, speaking with tons of other devotees, which I think is a really cool way to approach a spiritual tradition from a culture that you weren't raised in, right? This exact topic is actually something that comes up in the Consent Academy workshop videos that I told you about a second ago on the Discord server. Anyway, trying to get as much context as possible is a good way to go in general. I think a lot of people would probably agree. Okay, I will be back during a break to introduce the episode within the episode, but now let me properly introduce my first guest here. Cressida Stone is the author of Secrets of Santa Muerte. She is both a scholar and devotee of Santa Muerte, the Mexican folk saint. She leads a double life. She's a doctor of anthropology trained at the University of Oxford, publishing on Santa Muerte in academic journals. She also moves in occult circles, practicing witchcraft with the Brujas of Mexico, reading tarot cards for the followers of Santa Muerte. That is everyone from the wealthy elite to devotees from the disenfranchised segments of society and the underworld alike. She has apprenticed in Mexico with shamans of Santa Muerte at temples of the Saint of Death, learning their ways of working with the folk saint. She embraces a non-dualistic philosophy of life. All right, well, I really enjoyed my conversation with Cressida Stone, and I hope you all do too. Cheers.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Björn.
All right, well, my guest today is Dr. Cressida Stone. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. And you?
Doing pretty well, pretty well. Well, I'm really excited to hear about Santa Muerte and your travels and all of it. We're here to talk about the Secrets of Santa Muerte, a guide to the prayers, spells, and rituals and hexes of, working with the holy entity of death.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you so much for being here. So I know that you've been, from looking at your book here, you've spent the last 6 years studying with Santa Muerte curanderos in Mexico. Could we maybe talk a little bit about the adventures that led into your work with the Santa Muerte and taking this very, it sounds like, kind of in-depth path?
Yeah, it's actually been longer than that now. I can't even remember when my book came out. I think it came out last year, so maybe it's been 7, 8 years now, because obviously when I wrote the book, it came out later. But yeah, I am actually an anthropologist trained at Oxford University. And initially I started out doing my research actually for my Oxford work in Africa, in Senegal, which is in West Africa. And I was always fascinated by spirituality because I just had so many different spiritual experiences. Growing up as a child, I had precognitive dreams, and I felt that there was a whole world to explore. And, even though we're fed this rhetoric that science is so important, religion and spirituality, as you know, has such a predominant role in our world. So I spent time in Africa and I was fascinated by, people kind of call them witch doctors, but that's probably not the proper word. They're called mahabu. I spent time with these people and studying traditions in Africa, but I always felt sort of excluded as a woman. There were certain places I couldn't go to, etc., etc. Anyway, long story short, at Oxford, I was trained, to be super scientific, anthropological, but I always felt this need for spirituality in my life. Anyway, fast forward several years, I've attained my doctorate. I'm teaching anthropology at a university, and I go away to Mexico. It was the middle of winter. I was living at this point in Canada, in northern Canada, where the weather is just abominable at that time of year. It could drop to minus 40 degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. That's in Celsius, but it's bloody freezing. It's so cold that if you don't put on gloves, you're getting frostbite, etc. That kind of cold. So I go away to Mexico because I just needed to get away to the sun. But because I'm an anthropologist, I'm not one of these people that can just sit around the pool, drinking tequila, pina colada. And, I spoke Spanish already at this point. I just started speaking to local people that worked at the place where I was staying about religion, spirituality in the area. And I had heard of Santa Muerte, but, all the typical narco talk, which I really, really don't like. And we can get into that later. I had seen her pigeonholed, in Breaking Bad as this narco saint. So I started talking to people about local spirituality, and a lot of people brought up Santa Muerte to me. And I said, wow, where can I find anything to do with her? And they told me about a chapel in the region. And they also told me about shops selling esoteric products, dedicated to her. So I decided one day that I just really wanted to track down this chapel. And I went on this typical tourist tour to, it's actually a really beautiful place, to a nature reserve where they release baby turtles into the sea. And what you can do as a tourist, you can pay money and, they give you a little newborn hatched turtle. You then release it into the sea. So anyway, I got given my turtle, and given I am a university professor, I gave it a real pep talk. And I was like, you can do this. You can get to the sea. I know you're going to live a long life. And my turtle was actually the first to hit the sea. And, looking back on that day now, I don't know, Luxa, whether you're familiar with the mythology behind turtles in the Americas.
Isn't there some stuff about there? I know that it's a very rich symbol. I know that there's stories about the turtle being a sort of like vessel that carries the world.
Exactly. And I think that moment, because I was, this life had just hatched out of the shell. I think that it was just a deeply profound spiritual moment, and you have to release them at sunset, and they go out into the sea. And the fact that my turtle hit the waves first, it didn't hit me at the time, but later reflecting upon it, I just realized all the symbology, mythology was so rich. And later I asked the tour guide who took us there about this chapel, and he had actually not heard of it because he had recently come back from living elsewhere. and return to his community. And he was as keen as I was to locate this place because he was fascinated by his own culture and telling people about it. And he thought, well, this is really interesting. So at this point, it was getting dark and we were just in a really small bus and all the other tourists wanted to get back to the destination, which was about 2 hours away. But I convinced this man to help me find this chapel. And eventually we did. We found this chapel. We came upon it in the darkness and there were just all these candles burning. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And we arrived there. All the other tourists were just afraid because they saw these skeletons in a chapel and they just took one look and ran back into the bus. But I, as an anthropologist, was not in that frame of mind. And I actually went into the chapel and suddenly out of the darkness, this lady came with a long plait down her back. And it turned out she was indigenous. And honestly, I really believe perhaps that there are past lives or there's just something because I just struck up this conversation with her and it was if we'd known each other forever. And she gave me my first Santa Muerte statue, which was a red statue. And now I joke with her, oh, you did a love spell on me that day because, I've not been able to forget her since. And then after that, I decided I had to return and I kept returning and returning. And it's really hard to encapsulate everything that happened in a couple of sentences. And I feel like I've spoken for long enough on this, but to summarize, my stance completely changed from academic studying this from a point of, disassociation and intellectual curiosity to becoming a devotee. And that was never my intention, but having gone through near-death experiences, being welcomed also into the community by this sabia, this wise woman who owned the chapel, her daughter who is a bruja, a witch, and the rest of the family. I mean, I could never have predicted where I am today. It just completely changed my life. And I think that evening with the turtle was a sign that I was being reborn in the hands of death and her bony embrace.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Very cool. So maybe we could talk a little bit about, some of the symbology. You did mention the red statue, and maybe we could just mention to the listeners, what are some of these different colors symbolize?
There are 3 principal colors that people always refer to, but a whole panoply of other shades as well. So if we start off with that trifecta, it would be red, which, as we just spoke about, is the color of love, passion, lust. So if you're seeking to do any kind of love spell or, a sex spell, because Santa Muerte is not a spirituality which is judgmental about desire. So if you're seeking, an amorous relationship, even if it's just based on lust, then you would use red Santa Muerte. Great offerings for her are the kinds of things that you would bring to a lover. If you're working with red Santa Muerte and you want to bond with her, give her roses. People give her honey, apples, cinnamon, candy, chocolate, all these kinds of sweet and potentially spicy things because, you want that sweetness, you want that spiciness. And I've also had people work with her for self-love, which I think is really beautiful. And I've also known people turn to her for power because red, if we look at the color red, we can see that universally it is actually a very potent color. So Luxa, what do you think of when you see the color red?
I think a lot about it. I've definitely, read some stuff about like color psychology, which, pardon the pun, colors my perspective there. I definitely think about, as you said, passion. I think hunger. I know that it's common for a lot of restaurants to use a lot of red in their decor sometimes because it's thought to increase people's appetites. So I think that there is a lot there. I mean, fire and blood and things having to do with heat and warmth.
Exactly. So you touched on it all, and across the world, universally, we see that red is associated with blood, like you said, with fire, with passion, and these are all the things that you want to have or channel into when you're working love magic. You want that fiery relationship. You want that spice. And of course, you can imagine, desire coursing through people's veins, blood, your heart beating, right? When you see that special somebody. So working with Red Santa Muerte, and I would say really bonding with her, because my book is all about that. I don't want people to treat her as utilitarian, because I don't think that that's respectful, and I don't think that that's the way to work with her. I truly believe you need to establish this loving, reciprocal relationship with her, just as you would with anybody in your life. But because she's a deity, you have to do it with that much more respect and reverence. But moving on from that, and we can come back to that, of course, white is another color that again has universal meanings. I mean, what do you think of, Luxa, when you think of the color white?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think of, the idea of like a blank slate or a cloud, perhaps. I know there's the idea of like brightness, like a really, really bright light, I think is as another touchstone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that correlates with why and how you would want to form a deep bond with white Santa Muerte. They often call her La Niña Blanca, because you want to appeal to her to gift to you her white light, her white mantle. And so white is the color of cleansing. You can imagine that white color, even right now, if people are listening and they want to feel cleansed, Santa Muerte, I want you to picture her. She is a skeletal lady wearing a gown and holding a scythe, typically. So in this form, she would be wearing a white gown, and a perfect visualization is just to imagine her placing that white gown onto you, draping it over your body. And you can imagine that energy, that white energy, cascading into your body, cleansing your soul, your mind, your heart, and just freeing your whole etheric being of any negativity, and cleansing all evil that anybody may have sent you, illness that you may be suffering from. You can really visualize that beautiful white light just radiating through you. So I hope that, that will help some of your listeners. And that's what people turn to white Santa Muerte for peace, for harmony, for cleansing. And this is really a color that you can work with for many different things, and there will be no repercussions. People are often afraid of repercussions working in certain spiritual practices, but with white Santa Muerte, there's just such purity there that there will be no repercussion. And of course, white, again, across all spiritual traditions, is that color of cleansing, new beginnings. Whether we see it sometimes in marriage, the bride will wear white. We see it at funerals, and it's a color of innocence, of purity, and also of healing, of course.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that in other cultures, white is often, the primary funeral color, whereas, in the West, it's a lot of times black, which is interesting.
That is true, black. And let's move on to black. But, at funerals, we often see white flowers, right?
Sure,
Those are the flowers that we're going to see predominantly. So let's move on to black, because you just touched on that. And of course, black is used at funerals because, as you just mentioned, it's associated really intrinsically with death, right? With darkness, with the night, whereas white is a sort of celestial color of light, perhaps of sunshine, all of that kind of illumination. Black is the color of, as I said, midnight, the darkest hours, the dark places in our soul, perhaps. So black is also a very powerful color. It's almost not a color, right? Because it contains all other colors. If you are an artist and you mix all the colors that you have, of course, apart from white, you're going to end up with black. So it's very absorbing. So what else do you think of? Anything else, Luxa, when you see the color black?
Well, I definitely, there's a lot of symbology from different, traditions and stuff, but in like a really general sense for me, I think about Saturnian energies, which is, associated with death and with, the scythe that cuts. This is another figure that holds a scythe, right? Which is another kind of a thing that has in common with that. I would also think about this sort of, as you mentioned, that white being this sort of associated in a lot of traditions with celestial stuff. I would think about these like deep currents of power that the chthonic realm brings, this, these deep wells of power, like the sort of the void that gives birth to all creation and things like that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love how you mentioned the chthonic connection, because Santa Muerte is deeply chthonic and of the underworld. And while her white aspect is more, as you said, as we mentioned, connected to the celestial realms, her dark color is more of the underworld. And so in keeping with all of that, Black Santa Muerte is the color that you can turn to and work with for work of power, work of death, work of protection. So that could be anything ranging from vengeful work, hexing your enemies. It could be also protecting yourself from enemies, unwanted influences, negativity, illness. I know some people were working with Black Santa Muerte during COVID to protect themselves from that. Also a color of empowerment, because black is such a dominating color. I mean, obviously along with red, that people will turn to Black Santa Muerte. I mean, I was just speaking to a devotee the other day who uses it, who works with the color black and bonds with La Niña Negra and gives her offerings of tobacco, tequila. She is well known for liking the harder sort of luxuries of life, if you will. And he works with the color black so that he is actually more domineering in business, because he realized that in the past he had been taken advantage of in business. And he was tired of that. He was tired of people lying to him, backstabbing, or perhaps abusing of his generosity. So he turned to La Niña Negra to be more dominating in his career and more successful at making money. So there are all these kind of aspects that you can work with. I've also spoken with women in Mexico where, as unfortunately across much of the world, there are issues of gendered violence. In Mexico, there's been problems with missing and murdered women, as there have been, in many places also where there are indigenous women, such as in Canada and the US. And women will also turn to Black Santa Muerte for protection from potential perpetrators of such violence. And again, this time you can invoke her black mantle, but not for healing, but to cover you, to make you invisible, so that literally somebody who would seek to do you harm cannot see you.
3, Romeo, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
Greetings, it is I, Luxa from the future. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We'll be getting back to the rest of my chat with Cressida Stone soon to talk more about working with the different colors of Santa Muerte. I'll ask about red and connecting with one's ancestors when we come back. After the interview, we'll get into some fun listener mail and shout-outs, including audio from a listener supporter bibliomancy reading. Thanks so much to everybody who's making the show possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee. All right, moving into this episode. Within the episode, we're going to hear from a listener who would like to remain anonymous about things he felt he learned the hard way in his magical practice, and about what he might have done differently given his experiences. It can sometimes be really difficult to talk about the things we have going on in our magical work. Just finding the language to describe experiences can be super challenging for me personally. But it can be an incredibly valuable exercise to share information and get different takes on things. And when something goes wrong and you think you might know why, sharing that with others, I think, is an incredibly kind thing to do. So thanks so much to Zephod for having the bravery to share about these experiences, which I hope you will find helpful to hear. right, well, my guest this evening is Zephod. How's it going, dude?
It's going well. I'm happy to be here. Just for the listeners, for reference, if somebody might recognize my voice, I am using a pseudonym because this is a very personal story and I don't want it to overlap with some of the other stuff that I do. So,
Yeah, if you recognize the voice, maybe just discard it. Maybe it's somebody else that sounds very similar. Who knows? And I really appreciate you being willing to come and share your perspectives, your experiences about this stuff, because I think that these types of situations, while they can be difficult to talk about, are also really useful to share information about. So thank you so much for being willing to do that.
sure thing.
So what type of context would be useful for the listeners to know in terms of like getting into the perhaps cautionary tale that you have to share with us?
Yeah, so this is definitely a cautionary tale, also just like a testimonial, I guess, to the power of the things that, you talk about on the show and that people that listen to it experience. So for context, I am just some guy and I dabbled in magic. To put it into like a brief timeline, I was a non-believer in any of this. I used microdosing psilocybin for depression, and it worked for depression, but it also made me a believer. And I got really into the paranormal, and then I started seeing all these overlaps of like, paranormal and magic, and I wanted to experience that. So I was like, I'm going to do 1 month of daily practice. And I started out with the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram as my like starting point, and did that for like a month. And then I really enjoyed it. So then I started like doing a bunch of research, and I wasn't like doing any rituals or spells or anything like that. I was just like doing meditations and like, symbolic stuff and more like shadow work with a magical like overlay, and like getting in touch with myself and like for like 6 months, I did that. And then I decided I was going to do a very simple, like starting magical thing. And I went with a sigil, and I had read about beginner's luck with magic. And I knew that the first one usually works for people. So I was like, this has to be important. I need to like make this one count. And so I did a sigil, and I said, I want to speak to my daemon, like my personal shoulder angel. And so I made the sigil, and I, did a little ritual with a candle and stuff. And then I was like, okay, cool. I did magic. That was fun. I didn't think anything else of it because I know like you got to forget, right? Is what I was told. So 2 days later, I was taking a nap, and I had the craziest dream I've ever had. Very intense. Like I was talking to a guy. He told me his name. It was very, very vivid and like not a normal dream. And he gave me a bag, and in the bag it had like a bunch of binders and papers, and then a sachet, like a little plastic satchel of poppy seeds, and another one of like wheat berries. And I remember it very clearly. He gave me the bag. I set it down. It fell over. The poppy seeds spilled out. And he goes, I think you need to know this is really important. You got to keep going with the magic stuff. And I was like, okay. And then I woke up, and I was like, holy shit. I think I just spoke to my daemon. And so I was like, that was crazy. I did the sigil. I had the crazy dream, and it worked. And I didn't think anything else of it for like a month. And then there was a huge storm, and a giant tree branch fell on my house and damaged my roof. And I was like, man, that's crazy. And then like 2 weeks later, another huge storm, another giant tree branch fell on my roof. And it happened a third time. And by the third time, I was like, this is insane. Why does this keep happening?
That's a lot of tree branches falling on your roof.
Like I'm talking like 20 feet long, like a foot thick, a couple 100 pounds. I had to chop that shit up.
Maybe there's a tree that hasn't been well cared for that's super close to the house too. I guess it's the other, like, I'm always like looking at things from different perspectives. But yeah, that's still a lot, right? Like that's a lot.
Okay, so listen, the tree is in the front of the house, and it's about 50 feet tall, and I've had people come out and like trim it and stuff. The wind grabbed a branch on the far side, like on the opposite side from the house, ripped it off completely, just one branch, spun it around to the back of the house, and dropped it on the roof. And no other trees in the area were touched.
That's pretty
it's like
that's pretty specific, I suppose, or localized, like to whatever's happening there. And The idea of tree branches falling in one's house is something that's come up before in discussions surrounding magic too. This is actually not the first time I've heard of something like this happening, so that's very interesting.
I thought it was just like we were having crazy weather, you know. I
Sure.
didn't connect it to the ritual and everything and the sigil and the dream. But about a week after we did the third branch and had to deal with that, I went on a road trip. And when we got there, I was stretching. It was very windy. We were in Georgia, and I was on like a literal Indian mound in the woods in a cabin with my family. So I was out there and I was like, I did that sigil. That was cool. Maybe I can do some sort of like interaction here. So I took a cigarette and I slit it open and I put the tobacco in the wind and I gave it as an offering to the spirits. And I was like, that was really nice and, you know, very spiritual, and I felt good. And
So that inclination to do that, was that like something that you've heard of others doing, or was that just something that sort of like struck you as something that would be nice to do in the moment?
it struck me in the moment, but I knew that tobacco would be a good offering and stuff. So
Mhm.
like I'd done research. I disregarded the Dunning-Kruger scale. Is what happened, to be honest with you.
I think that the Dunning-Kruger effect is something that magicians or people in any field really should just be aware of. Yeah, that's I love that you bring that up. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Fuck yeah.
So then about an hour and a half, 2 hours after I did that, I was still outside. I was stretching and my neck popped and my hands went numb. And I was like, this is not good. And then my neck popped again when I turned my head and my hands, like the feeling came back. And then all the muscles in my neck seized up. And I spent the whole trip laying in the bed, like with my head propped up, and endured the drive back home, then went straight to the ER like 2 days after that happened.
And this was right after you did this offering, like this kind of effect. You felt this physical like sensation happening.
Yeah, and it still
Okay.
affects me to today. Like I have to go to a chiropractor 3 times a week for the next 3 months. Like I'm still dealing with this. So
Shit, yeah, that sounds intense.
so I went to the ER, they checked me, they said, you know, you seem fine. And just to put it in perspective, like I have an answer now to what was going on, what's wrong with my neck. And it's being fixed, but it's almost 2 years later from this that it took me like dealing with it to figure it out and get a solution in place. Anyways, so I went to the ER. They said I like sprained my neck. I went home. I spent 3 days laying in bed. During those 3 days, I decided I was going to research poppy seeds and wheat berries from the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to the Slavic god Veles. One of his symbols is wheat and poppy. And the crazy thing is, in the mythology, Veles is brothers with Perun, and Perun is the god of the air and the high places, and Veles is the god of the low places and the wet places. And he goes up into the high places to steal Perun's wife, and they battle it out, and then he is thrown back to Earth in the form of a giant storm.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So
So
we see this like storm connection and everything. That's very fascinating.
there's also a connection with my actual like birth name that I'm not gonna like. I can't get into specifics because
Yeah,
I'm trying to be
you
anonymous,
just said
you know.
earlier
But
that that's not what you're here to do tonight, which is totally understandable. Yeah.
but there was a lot of synchronicities as well during all of this. So I was like, okay, I think it's Veles. So I did a little ritual that I made up, and it went really well, and I felt good, and started doing like a daily 30-minute little meditation offering kind of deal, just like a daily practice kind of deal. And yeah, I felt good. No more branches fell in my house. Like things started to smooth out with work and shit. So I felt like that was the right direction to go with it.
Fuck yeah. What
Yeah.
types of like kind of cautionary things would you like tease out of this? Like are there places where you feel like there would have been things that you would have done differently had you had more information or something like that?
I think I would have taken it more seriously when I started it. Like if you ask to talk to your personal daemon, you should probably do what they tell you right away, not wait a month and have a bunch of tree branches fall on your house and end up in the ER before you are like forced to lay down and do the research, I think.
Yeah, so how do you think a person would know the difference between what their personal daemon was saying versus like what they already like wanted to do or something like that? Like how does one in your mind, because a lot of people have different like, feelings about this, like in your mind, how do you tease apart those kinds of spiritual messages that are coming from a place that's like maybe somewhere bigger or outside of ourselves versus like those things that are maybe internal to us? Or is there a difference really?
Yeah, I think there is. I think if you know your internal workings well, then you're able to spot the inconsistencies easier. So like I was saying, I did a lot of shadow work and stuff before I got to the point where I was ready to do magic. I have a little kid. At the time she was 4 years old, so I did not want to bring anything into the house, and I didn't want to fuck it up and
Sure,
endanger my family. So like I said, I did a lot of work on myself before I was ready. Like I was sure I could do it. I didn't take it lightly until I was done. And then I was like, oh, that was cool. And then I didn't continue. Like I did the ritual to get the information, and then I disregarded the information, or I put it off, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that it's possible that a lot of people listening might have like had experiences that are kind of like, oh yeah, I've done that too. And like, yeah, it's always like, oh man, if I just would have listened in the first place. Yeah, that's very relatable, at least to me.
Yeah, so I spent about a year in a daily practice that was constantly changing as I was learning stuff. And I got to give a shout out to you, because I reached out to you at the very beginning and I found your Discord, and it was like a place of where I could like talk to people or like get good information. Because there's so much BS out there when I was first getting started. If you Google LBRP, you get like 17 different versions, like where do you begin?
Yes.
So
yeah. Well, no, I'm glad that you found us. Fuck yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of different takes on this stuff out there. Like for sure.
But that's the thing, is like it's a personal practice. The back end workings of it, I think, are the same, whatever overlay you put on it. And each person is different, so you got to tweak it for yourself as you grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea that we can kind of like get to the nitty-gritty, like dissect things in a way that we can actually like look at the mechanics of it, and then from that place adapt them to our own specific like ways of thinking or working or moving in the world or whatever.
Right. Your framework, it's your personal interface,
Mm-hmm.
with the other, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot
And
of different names for with whatever we interact with, but yeah, absolutely.
so as I went through this about year and a half that I was doing it, I got more and more dedicated, and like I was seeing very specific results and synchronicities and things that really made me believe, oh, this works. So I guess we'll get to the cautionariest part of the story. So I was seeing a doctor for my neck because it was still bothering me. And she put me on a medication that is called baclofen. And what it does is it works on the dopamine system in the brain to relax muscles. And when I say it works on the dopamine system, I mean that I went full bipolar, like mood swings. Like I felt manic, and then I felt angry, and then I felt depressed, and then back to manic. And yeah, it was not a good time. So I was on one medication that worked, and she switched me onto this one to try it. And at the time that I got switched onto it, we like randomly became broke. We had essentially just run out of money trying to get the house fixed up after all these trees and shit, everything else. So
A lot of transition, a lot of stress, it sounds
yeah,
like. Yeah, okay.
yeah. And my wife and I were in an argument, and I said, well, how much money do you need to feel safe? And she said $100,000. Like, I think she was just being angry at me, like, we can't do this. And I was like,
100 grand would be fucking nice. Yeah,
yeah. So I'm all manic on this medication that I've just been switched onto. And I'm like, oh, well, guess what? I'm a fucking magician. I can make us, 100 grand, no problem. So I did a ritual that was extremely questionable. The reason why it was questionable, one, I used my own blood as an offering. And two, I lied about what I wanted to happen. I knew what I wanted in my heart,
Okay.
but the ritual was not designed for that. Like I
Okay,
knew
so
what needed to happen, I guess, to get the money.
okay, I just if you wouldn't mind, I would love to kind of just drill down just on this a little bit on like a theory way. Like, so using your own blood as an offering, like what part of that, because there's a lot of different schools of thoughts about this. Like, what about this in this particular like context of the ritual do you think was like maybe not the best way to go?
It was the first time I'd ever done it. It scared me in the moment, and it was a really big deal, like to me personally.
Mm.
So it was like giving a very big offering, I
Sure.
guess.
Okay. Yeah,
Like,
not just
let's
like
seal
the
the
thing.
pact. Part of it, because I was raised in a very Christian household,
Mm.
you know, and Veles is the god of the underworld. So I'm giving my blood to the god of the underworld as a Christian raised boy. That is no, you know.
Okay, yeah,
But
that makes
here's the thing: is
sense.
like I don't believe in Christian texts specifically. Like I take from that. There's good stuff in there, but like
Sure.
I'm not a Christian. You know what I
I
mean?
think
Anymore.
even for folks that weren't like just raised like, in Christian households and stuff, like I think that it's such a thing. It's something that really like permeates our culture to such an extent too that like even if you weren't, exposed to it directly as a child, like those symbols are still so powerful.
And it's all, you know, it's all symbology. It's all beliefs. Like what you believe this to be is what makes it important and what makes it what it is, you know.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you
Um,
so much for like being willing to sort of like drill down on that like theory stuff.
and so the thing about is I lied about what I wanted to happen.
Mm. And
What
that's a fascinating, yeah, like the idea, like, can we lie to the gods? Like, is something that's come up recently on the show. And yeah, that's so fascinating.
Well, here's the thing. Part of the reason why I'm doing this incognito is because the ritual that I did, my wife had asked her father, who's a millionaire, for a loan, and he was going to give us like 10, 20 grand. And I did the ritual designed to give him a dream to give us 100,000 instead. The reason why that was a lie is because I knew that he wasn't going to give us the money. But I did know that my wife was supposed to get an inheritance from her dad, who was going to get the money from his mom when she died, my wife's grandmother. So I knew that my wife's grandmother my wife would get money from that if she passed, right? So I was like, in my mind, I was like, no, I'm not doing it because of that. I'm not doing it because of that. I'm not doing it because of that. And on an even deeper level, I was.
Okay. So, and this is a sort of interesting philosophical question here too about like where are these lines drawn in terms of like statements of intent that we bring into our rituals versus our true intentions in our hearts or whatever. And like, because people also do talk about how important it is to like hash these things out in a very conscious way so that like the intentions of your heart are expressed, right? And that can be difficult to parse out. It takes a lot of introspection sometimes. So like it's interesting to hear you talk about that tension being something that you think caused an issue in this particular working. And
Well, you know, they say that magic takes the path of least resistance, right? So
sure,
with
every
the
in
rich,
nature and every I like to think about magic as being a sort of like component of like the world that we live in, and that's
mm,
how the world works in general. So yeah, absolutely.
so the energy that I put out for this intention of it, I did a powerful magical ritual, but it was designed for one thing. But here's what happened after I did this ritual, okay? It was designed to give my father-in-law a dream to give us $100,000. But in my heart, I knew that the only logical source for this magic to work from would be my wife's grandmother, who was getting elderly, wasn't doing so well. She was supposed to pass money down. And I was also on medication that was making me manic and crazy. Like it was not a good combination.
Okay.
So I did the ritual. I went outside. I had a little bundle of all my things that I had, you know, consecrated and used and whatever, put the blood on it. I buried it. I came back to the step. I turned around in the backyard and there was a huge owl sitting on a tree branch. It was right there in the tree. I'd never seen an owl in my backyard before. I live in a suburb and it looked at me and I looked at this owl and I just got this horrible, horrible feeling of dread and just like, are you sure?
How much of that do you think had to do with, to me at least, like listening to this, like part of what you've done with like conducting this ritual is you've broken some taboos that, for you and your upbringing and stuff, like were pretty intense and stuff too. Like there's a lot of stuff about, going to places that previously like weren't okay to go or think about or anything. Like this is something that I've kind of tried to interrogate in my own practice. The pendulum swings both ways, right? Like there's always going to be this sort of like pushback against anything in a way. Do you think it was something like that?
I think partially, but no, I think it was mostly about the fact that I've been doing this for a year and a half. And I mean, when I say doing this, I mean like living it 24/7, podcasts, magic, books in my ears, at work all day long, like come home, reading about it, doing magic. Like I knew what was going on.
It makes sense too that like in your own knowing and your own understanding of your life and stuff, it's like, oh shit, like I didn't quite line up with my own ethics. I didn't quite line up with my own ideas about whatever it is. Like there's some kind of like misalignment in a philosophy or something like that. And then that can create that tension of like, oh shit, there's gonna have to be some kind of thing that happens to like bring things back into alignment with each other or whatever.
Right. And that is the part that was like the most stressful, because I did the ritual and 2 days later he gave us $30,000. So I didn't get my 100 grand that I did the ritual for. And because of that, because I knew he wasn't going to do it, I was like, fuck, what is going to happen? Like now I have this huge thing hanging over my head. And because I was all crazy at the time because of the medication, I got super mad. Oh, sorry. Let me go back 1 second. The owl, after it looked at me and I got that feeling, it flew away. And when it flew away, it had a robin and a cardinal and a chickadee following it. And I've never seen that before. Like they were all just right there and they all just took off together. That was just a weird little detail. Anyway, so 2 days later, gave us the money. Not what I was expecting.
Some
like it's what I was expecting.
Partial success though, right? Some people would have been like, okay, well, we got some fucking money. It's not all the money, but that's like still not nothing, right? Like
right. No, it was enough to get us out of, we were able to claw our way back up, into the red or the black. So yeah, no, it wasn't nothing. It was definitely what we needed. But because of that, then I was like, man, I have this massive amount of energy and emotion that I stuck out there in the universe. Like, how's it going to come back to me? What have I done? So I got really mad and I quit the medication and I did 2 more rituals. I did one ritual. I was burning salt and just like going nuclear on everything and just, tearing down all the magical stuff that I had built over the last year and a half, whatever. And then I did one more, like I severed ties, everything, I did one more to put protections on my house. And then I haven't really done any magic since then. And it's about a year later.
Okay.
About 6 months ago, 5 months ago. Yeah, it was about 5 months ago. No, it was about 6 months. I don't know. Anyways, doesn't matter. My wife's grandma gets pretty sick, right? And there's a whole like thing with her 4 children. They are not on speaking terms. And then one of them convinced her to write her son out of the will, so my wife's dad wouldn't get any money. And then they had like lawyers involved. Oh, and then they did a DNR on her, and she passed without the rest of the family having a say in it. So it was like a huge, massive family blow up fight.
Yeah,
money,
sounds
lawyers,
really complicated.
It was
Gosh.
horrible.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Horrible.
I'm so sorry that your family had to go through that. That sounds really complicated.
Well, after it all settled down, the money was distributed, and my father-in-law decided he was going to give the money to his 3 kids, and he split it equally between them. My wife told me about a month ago, we're going to get $100,000.
Right. Well, the serpent swallows its tail. It all comes back full circle. I mean, yeah, such a fascinating story. Thank you so much for like sharing all this. So like, where are you at now with your magical practice? Like having had all of these kind of rocky and varied experiences with things.
Right now, mostly I meditate. I do a lot of manifestation stuff. I do some Monroe Institute consciousness stuff.
Projecting onto the hologram or of reality.
Yeah.
And whatnot. Okay. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
That's super fun. Into it.
That's mostly my practice right now. And I've had some crazy, as cheesy as the term is, I would call it a synchromystical kind of practice. I'm just a synchronicity magnet. It's crazy. So I do a lot of like walking meditation type focused consciousness stuff, binaural beats and hemi-sync stuff. There's a really good meditation called Liquid Luck by Dr. Joe Gallenberger, and it's all about manifestation visualization, where you're creating a potion. You're a witch or a wizard is what he says in the guided meditation, and you create this potion, and each potion ingredient is like an emotion of like gratitude, love, giving, abundance, like all these different feelings, and you have to like feel the feelings and put them in a little bottle, and then you drink the bottle, and then the next day
you're a mixologist. Okay, I love this. They're very fun.
The next day you're supposed to do something where you might get lucky, like go buy a lottery ticket or some shit. This guy teaches classes in casinos in Vegas, and like lets them do these meditations, and then they get to go play cards and slot machines and like see that it actually works. Like, it's crazy stuff. So
all right.
I do like fun, they're just like a daily thing where I'm like, okay, today I'm going to try and manifest the number 71 and see where I can see it. Or today's going to be limes, and like try and manifest some weird reference to limes throughout the day or whatever.
I love it. Fuck yeah. Well, all right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share about these experiences with me and the listeners. Is there anything that you want to mention that I haven't asked about? Or do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
No, I don't think so. I think that was the whole story. Like, yeah, just if you're going to do magic, like, know what you're doing in your heart. Like, why are you doing it? How do you want it to, shake out? Like, I definitely regret everything that I did. I don't blame myself. I've integrated that whole experience, but now that seems like it's actually come out, I feel like I can share it. This shit's powerful and it works, and you have to use it very carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really wise. Like, it definitely is effective, or people would not continue to play around with it throughout the ages and across histories and localities and the rest of it. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me tonight. And I really appreciate it, dude.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me on. It's nice to tell the story so that, at least it's on record.
All right, fuck yeah. Thanks again so much to Zephod. I think that for me, the idea that he brought up about going against your own will, or sort of being dishonest with yourself about like what you really want, can be parsed out using the model of consent that Consent Academy talked about in the last episode of the show, which is 88 Autonomy, Egregores, Magic and More with the Consent Academy. One thing that jumps out is how Zephod's capacity was impacted by being on the medication and by the stress of the situation that he was in. The idea of like slowing down and taking your time is something that's been coming up a lot in the conversations about magic, consent, and other things as well. So if you're curious to learn more about this stuff, check out the videos on the consent workshops that we have on our Discord server, or you can check out the consentacademy.com. They've got a lot of awesome resources. As I said, those videos that we have on the Green Machine Discord server, which are specifically aimed at magical folks, will be available for around a month or so do not delay. The idea of consent being a central guiding philosophical principle to doing group magical work, as well as providing education about the nuances of consent to magically inclined people, is something I'm incredibly interested in, and I feel incredibly proud and grateful to have the opportunity to be pursuing this type of work. It's definitely like one of those things that I discovered through my journey with Hecate, and it feels really fucking good. So gratitude. Thank you so much to everybody who has been assisting with this and our efforts, and who's been showing so much enthusiasm for this way of doing things. Fuck yeah. Okay, as I said, I'll be back after the interview to share some listener mail as well as a few final thoughts. But now, let's get back into the rest of my conversation with Cressida Stone. Leading us into that, we're going to hear a track from We the Hollowed and Green Mushroom Project digital mixtape, Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2. You can listen to all the great tracks from this project for free on Bandcamp by clicking on the link in the show notes. And thanks so much to everybody who contributed tracks to the digital mixtape. Alright, this is Nell by Dakota Slim.
Silent daydream.
would La Niña Negra, would she be somebody that you could ask to help with work connecting with your ancestors?
Yeah, some people do, but more so I've heard people turning to bone Santa Muerte de Hueso, so, made of bone, and also brown Santa Muerte, because there's the idea, of connecting to the earth and to ancestors. But I love that you mentioned that, because also I see Santa Muerte, La Niña Negra, as very connected to the earth and death, so I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do that. And when I think about La Niña Negra, I also think about the underworld and all the bones. I also think of all our deceased ancestors, all the plants and animals, flora and fauna that have come before us and that have also passed and given their lives for us to have the world that we currently have today. So I think it's a very rich color to work with. It has many different meanings. It's what I would call multivocal.
Yeah, even in just a very sort of like literal way, like you mentioned, like, all these organic compounds, all these plants and animals and stuff. And I'm thinking about like petroleum and that, being, as they say, black gold, and that also being a source of power. And there's an interesting metaphor there for me. Very cool.
You and I are absolutely on the same wavelength, because I was just thinking petroleum.
I love that. You had mentioned some of the ways that Santa Muerte has been contextualized that you're hoping to help people who are interested and move away from. Is that a good way of kind of saying it?
Yeah, she's been very much pigeonholed and lambasted as a narco saint. I mean, that is the most common rhetoric, the most common narrative that we see in the media, the mainstream media, and often in Hollywood films and even games like Ghost Recon. But it's my desire to move away from that, because I would be lying to you if I said that there weren't narcos sicarios that venerate Santa Muerte. Of course there are. But at the same point, there are narcos sicarios who venerate Catholic figures, Catholic saints like the Virgin Mary, right? I mean, all you need to do is turn to Italy and look at the Italian mafia and how much money they've poured into the church. So I think in any spirituality, you're going to find people from the darker walks of life venerating whichever deity it is, whichever saint figure it is. But I think that because people are so afraid of death in the West in general, not everyone, of course, that they see death as this macabre force, and it's really death denying. And so I think that that's why they pigeonhole her as this narco saint and try to make her out to be this very formidably dangerous deity, which is absolutely ridiculous. So during my work, I've really encountered people from all walks of life. And of course, there are people, as I said, in the underworld who are working with her. But there are also housewives, fishermen, farmers, office workers, lawyers, politicians. You can really find devotees in every sector of society. Now, obviously, she does truly appeal to the marginalized, the disenfranchised, those from minority groups, and people for whom death is a daily part of life. So, of course, that can be people in the underworld. It can also be prisoners, some of whom, may be innocently incarcerated. I met this beautiful couple online who reached out to me through my book. And this prisoner who reached out to me, and this is not the first time, a lot of people do write to me, and I've had people reach out to me who have been in jail or who have just come out from jail. This person who reached out to me had been in jail for 18 years, but was innocent and had turned to Santa Muerte to really get through that difficult time in jail. And very beautifully, he had started praying to Santa Muerte to find love in his life. And meanwhile, on the outside of jail, walking free, his partner, who wasn't his partner obviously at the time, but this person who he ended up meeting was also praying to, I believe, Red Santa Muerte for love. And they ended up meeting on a write-a-prisoner website, and they ended up writing to each other. And he's an artist, and his partner, I believe, is very adept at digital online work. And they started a business, which, I want to promote, selling Santa Muerte statues and other items. It's called Firm Art online, and Firm is spelled with an E at the end, and Art is spelled with an E at the end. So firmartonline.com. And so they started this business. Now, thank goodness he has now been released, manumitted from jail, but, you know, is starting a new life, trying to set up in society. And, you know, that's really difficult for people. I've had prisoners write to me before. It's very difficult when you come out from jail, because you have to face a society that is perhaps very different from when you first went into jail. And so there's all these demands on you. And so I truly believe that Santa Muerte helps people begin afresh. I mean, even if we look at my tale of the turtle tour, I think a lot of people come to her, and I've mentioned this before, because they go through very difficult periods in their life. And this could be anybody. I mean, not just prisoners, not just people from the underworld. All of us go through very difficult phases in our lives where we may experience a death of the self, a death of who we think we are. And we have to be incredibly strong and rise up from a very difficult situation. It could be illness. It could be literal near death of ourself, or it could be death of a loved one or near death of a loved one. But it could also be a divorce. It could also be a business going bankrupt. I mean, Luxa, you tell me, what are other difficult situations, right? There are so many difficult
There's so many, yeah. But what you're
Yeah.
saying makes a lot of sense. And I've definitely, you know, had an experience recently that it was very difficult, but it allowed me to really test my mettle, as they say, and really dig down and see where that strength was. And my own, you know, devotional practice. I work with Hecate very closely, and so that was a real rock in that storm for sure.
Yeah, so we all hit rock bottom, and I don't think that society necessarily gives us the tools to deal with that. You know, there is psychotherapy and so on and so forth, but not everyone has access to that. And it also doesn't work for everybody.
Well, and even
even
if you do take, I mean, even in therapy, it's often talked about. I've talked to several therapists that say that, like, you know, a spiritual practice or some type of a spiritual thing can be a huge benefit for people. It can really work synergistically with what you mentioned as well.
Absolutely. And as a geeky anthropologist, I've actually read a lot of studies about this that say, even from an intellectual point of view, that, you know, the scientists, the social scientists will say, believing that you have. So they will say, believing that you have a deity by your side will give you that very positive mental outlook that will give you strength. But, you know, I don't want to go into the question of belief here, because, you know, we're not talking academically. I would rather say knowing that you have a deity that supports you, that is with you all the time, really can give you that strength. And turning to that deity, especially, you know, perhaps La Niña Negra for her strength, or red Santa Muerte for self-love, can really, or white Santa Muerte for healing, purple Santa Muerte for healing, whichever color, you know, Santa Muerte you feel you can bond with, form a deep relationship with, is going to help you get through and heal. So I think that my message to people about Santa Muerte, she's often labeled the folk saint of death. And when I first started writing academically, I honestly thought that was who she was, because a lot of the academic literature will tell you that. But for me, she's non-dualistic, and she is both life and death, because they are inextricable. So where there is life, there is death, and where there is death, there is life. You can't separate the two. So Santa Muerte, although she helps you get through the end of things, she also gives you that new life. She helps you to be reborn, and not, you know, in the evangelical sense per se, more in the sense of reforming yourself and giving you a new vista. And I think also gratitude for the things that you do have, knowing that if something has come to an end, much as that's very, very extremely painful, it also opens new portals, new doors, new avenues to other things in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this. I have so many more questions I would love to ask, but I'm looking at the time and it is getting short. Is there anything that you would like to mention that I didn't ask you about?
No, I just think that if people want to start a spiritual practice with her, you can start small. She is not a demanding deity. This is, people often ask me about how to set up an altar, and obviously there are details about that in my book. But you don't need to go out and buy the most expensive statue. In fact, you don't even need a statue. You could just have a skull or anything that to you represents La Santa Muerte. And a tea-light candle is sufficient. A glass of water is sufficient. A wild flower that you have picked up outside. Sharing whatever booze you may have on hand, or if you're a smoker, whatever smokes you have on hand. Literally things that you have to hand are absolutely fine. But I would say if you really want to be devoted to death, what is most important is forming that relationship through prayer, through spending time with Santa Muerte, talking to her, engaging in dialogue, asking her to manifest herself in your dreams, send you visions and omens, and really respect and reverence, I think, are the most important thing. This is not a materialistic religion. If you want to get a gold chain with Santa Muerte on it, no, that's fine, but that's sort of not the way that you establish a rapport with her. It's truly about, for me, it's about daily prayer and daily practice, as I think any strong spiritual practice that you have should be based on.
Yeah, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that a lot of these, these concepts, they make a lot of sense regardless of, what deity you're working with. Like, you want to have that, at least in my experience, like having that personal relationship, having that rapport is really the way to kind of like get in deeper with that work. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I adore about working with her, and why I put purple Santa Muerte in my book, purple is truly the color of magic, witchcraft, psychic power. And when you work with Santa Muerte, you can truly tap into that intuitive psychic side of yourself. And I think that at least in Western society, in many places, not everywhere, and obviously not in Mexico for a lot of people, we've sort of pushed science to the fore, but people are really craving spirituality. And a lot of us are well aware that there is something more out there. And so Santa Muerte really helps you to tap into that something more out there, into your intuition, into your psychic side, into the sensory aspects of this world. And she can truly bring a lot of healing, and not just physically, but also I would say spiritually, if you are open to working sort of with what in Jungian terminology they call the shadow self, to develop yourself as a human being in all ways, not just materialistically, but also if you seek spiritual development.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Where can listeners find your work?
So my book, Secrets of Santa Muerte, is available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any good bookstore seems to carry it. You can also find me online on X, I think it's called nowadays, Instagram, and TikTok. I believe that I'm just at Secrets of Santa Muerte, or possibly I think on X I'm at Cressida Stone. So I share small little bits and tips there, prayers, ideas about working with her. One thing I will say is I'm not typical TikTok, which you won't generally see me doing a tutorial on how to, do this spell or do that. But I do believe that, if you are interested in witchcraft and spells, these things are best done in the shadows. I mean, that would be my advice for everyone. You don't really want to be broadcasting your work too much. I mean, that's something I really learned in Mexico, is be careful of what you put out there.
Sure. Because
other people can cast the evil eye or send maleficent energy to you so that your work actually does not function. So you need to be a little bit careful in what you do with regards to that. And that's why I'm not broadcasting loads of how I did this spell, etc.
That makes sense. Yeah. This is something I think a lot about as a podcaster and as like a magician and stuff. I think a lot about this, and what does it make sense to share and what does not make sense to share, because I think that there can be the sort of other side of it too. Like, the tradition that I like work most in is chaos magic, because it's a way that my background is in science, but it's a way for me to like reconcile my spiritual experiences and scientific ways of thinking about things. And having that semantic set is a really like useful way for me to sort of like reconcile these different lenses that I have. But so thinking about what is the sort of like overall like effect of this thing going to be, and how is it going to affect it to have people know about it? Some people would say like, well, if it's, you know, something that is like a brand logo, which could be a type of magic, like the more people know about that, the more powerful it gets. But there's all kinds of like ups and downs with it too, right? There's brand competitors, for instance, and all kinds of other things. So I think I definitely agree with you there that there are some things that are probably best just, you know, done on one's own with one's magical assistants, that, you know, your unseen allies or your deities or whatever, and keep your own counsel about it and stuff. But I do think there's other things that can get a little signal boost and ways of doing magic where you're like intentionally doing that, but you do want to always be very cognizant of how that could be interfered with, and perhaps even set up some countermeasures along, you know, the lines of protecting it from that and things like that. So yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, and you know, one of Santa Muerte's names is Señora de las Sombras, which literally means Lady of the Shadows. So she is about working in the shadows, you know, and if you want to be a secret devotee, I've met many people who are secret devotees who don't want their family and friends to know about this. That's also absolutely fine. And that's why I sort of like working with her in more mysterious ways and in the shadows. And coming back to your scientific background, perhaps you know the name now, right now it's escaping me. There was an experiment that was done where they replicated the experiment where scientists, and I can't remember what it's called, it was the something effect, and it will come back to me in a second, where they were observing, I think, particles going through a slot. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really cool kind of touchstone for like a lot of conversations about like spirituality and ontology and all kinds of other things. In a sort of a nutshell, there's what I think you got close to it. The observer effect is one of the ways that it's
That's
called.
exactly it.
Yeah. And basically through this experiment, they found that but measuring the thing, that actually seeing the thing is a way of measuring it, and measuring something, you have to interact with it in order to measure it. So there's no way to like measure something without changing that thing. And this is like one example of that. But yes, it's very complicated, and I don't want to get us too far into the weeds here.
Well, I just want
yeah.
to touch upon that because I know that the observer effect basically concluded that observing a situation or phenomenon necessarily changes it. Mm-hmm. And that's why, you know, coming back to what we were saying before, you want to think about what you put online. And as you said, sometimes it may make something more powerful because people are observing it, noticing it, but sometimes it may take away from that power or change something, and you don't know how it might change something. So
these are complex systems and can be very unpredictable. So yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you will be willing to maybe come back and talk a little bit more about La Santa Muerte with me sometime.
I would absolutely love to, and I love how our minds were working in sync at so many points during this.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels that I found in looking at your book and everything with some of my Hecatian practices and stuff. And I had another devotee of Santa Muerte on a little while ago, and I was telling him that I'm not sure if they're like, maybe Hecate and La Santa Muerte is like, if Hecate is kind of like this mother figure in my life, then maybe La Santa Muerte is like her good friend, and my auntie or something like that, because there are so many parallels with just like the symbolism and so much else. So it's really cool.
Yeah, well, they're both sort of dark, divine, fierce, feminine, in my opinion. Different, of course. And I don't, you know, some people try to create all these parallels and Jungian archetypes and conjoin all these different goddesses and folk saints, etc. And I think that we have to appreciate them for their individuality, but there are definitely beautiful similarities. And Santa Muerte is certainly a mother figure to many, but she is a dark mother, and she can be a dangerous mother too, which is what I love about her. She's not just the kind mother that's like, oh, that's just fine, sweetie. She's the kind of mother will whoop somebody's ass if they definitely deserve it.
And teach you the hard lesson that you might need to learn, perhaps, is one thing that Hecate has certainly done for me.
That is true. And that's why, you know, another little piece of advice for your listeners is when you ask for something, be aware of the consequences. And if you're asking for something, you might want to put a little caveat in that and say, okay, please don't teach me too hard, because I've had experiences with Santa Muerte where I've asked for things, especially related to spiritual knowledge and development. And she has just led me through these incredible and very exciting experiences, but that really, shook me to my core, to where I learned to say, okay, please treat me gently if I feel that I need that gentle treatment, because she is understanding and a beautiful and wonderful mother. But as you said, sometimes we can learn the hard way, and sometimes we might be at a point in our life where when we're not ready for that. So we have to be careful for what we ask for. Be careful. What is it that they say? Be careful what you ask for. You just might get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's very good advice. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that that's a good place to leave it. And I will go ahead and put links to all of the things that you mentioned in the show notes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and I do look forward to coming back.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cressida.
Okay.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Muerte.
All right, thanks so much to Cressida Stone for joining me. Check out the show notes to find links to her work, and you can also find a link to the shop that she mentioned there. There's a lot to think about in today's conversation. I really enjoyed it. Magic and science was something that we touched on, and this can be such a complicated subject, gosh, especially for me. When it comes to magic and medicine in particular, and here I'm talking about evidence-based medicine, like Western medicine is what it's sometimes called. Magic can be a great addition to science, but I wouldn't necessarily use magic instead of evidence-based medicine if I had access to both of them. Obviously, access can be a huge issue there. In recent history, magical thinking and also a good bit of fear-mongering and stuff like that surrounding disease and illness and authority and other things like that has prevented some people from taking measures to reduce the risk of becoming infected or infecting others with disease. It's also kept many people from seeking medical care that might have helped them from getting sick in the first place. It's sort of sad and complicated and confusing thing about the world. But the world is full of things that are sad and complicated and confusing. Working with death or chthonic energies can sometimes be a way of making peace with some of these things. So I appreciate Cressida being willing to share some of her perspectives about working with Santa Muerte. If you like the show and you like what I've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. Making the show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it, so thank you so much to the people who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell your friends, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at the next ceremonial potluck you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible or give it stars. All of these things are super, super fucking helpful. So thank you so much to everybody who is doing that. And don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of the follow button so you can get updates when new episodes come out. All right, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. First of all, shout out and much love to all the Pocket Wizards. As I said before, I'm really honored to be part of such a cool, smart, and kind community. I'm continually impressed by the talent and thoughtfulness and intelligence of the people who come to hang out there on the server. I'm really stoked to be doing the work that we're now doing with Void House and exploring consent and magic and all of these things. I know there are already some things about my own practice that I understand better, having added this new tool set and vocabulary that we're working with, and that's really fucking exciting. So I wanted to say how much I also value the moderation team there. I don't say this enough, but thank you. It's an honor to work with such conscientious folks. We had a conversation about DARVO and other things like that. DARVO stands for deny, accuse, reverse, victim, and offender. It's a sort of like thing that comes up as a way of people like not taking accountability for things, or sometimes can be an abuse tactic or other things like that. We sort of started talking about these dynamics the other day as part of figuring out how to deal with a situation that had arisen, and even though it was like annoying that we were having to deal with like problematic behavior, and I sort of like wanted to punch somebody in the face for being rude to one of my mods, I also at that moment felt incredibly fucking proud of how like adult and well things were being handled. So fuck yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all. Shout out to Gary. Congratulations on your nuptials. Shout out to Tyler on Instagram. Thank you so much for the kind words. I'm glad that you're enjoying the show. Shout out to Laura Tempest Zarkov and Ron Pedron, editors of the new book, Serpents of Circe, available now from Revelor Press. I'm very honored to have my work included in that, and I had a lot of fun during the virtual release party. Looking forward to talking with Laura and Ron about this very cool project for the show soon. And there's lots of other really great content coming your way that I'm stoked to share, including a dope conversation that I had with Mortellus. We've got Cliff from Enochian Today, and a variety of other fun surprises in store for you all. All right, as I mentioned, I now have a listener-supporter bibliomancy reading to share with you all. It's kind of a fun one, and the person actually sent me an audio response, which I have been given permission to share with you all. So I appreciate that, and let's go ahead and dive in. All right, greetings, Zed. This is Luxa here to do your Patreon bibliomancy reading. Let's see, the question is, after this upcoming class, what can you expect from the outcome? All right, let's see what text we'll be consulting here. All right, this is a pop science book called Dr. Tatiana's Sex Advice to All Creation. I will be right back here. Let me go find that. All right, I have here in my hand Dr. Tatiana's Sex Advice to All Creation, the definitive guide to the evolutionary biology of sex by Olivia Judson. All right, Eris, what can expect as the outcome from this upcoming class? For escalation of fights in elephants, see pool, 1989A. Thank you, Eris. Escalation of fights in elephants, see pool, 89A. Interesting. Okay, well, you'll obviously have context for all of this that I lack, but the first thing that comes to my mind is Lord Ganesha, who I was just working with in celebration with one of the holidays associated with him, but that's neither here nor there. But hopefully this has been helpful. I really appreciate the support, and I hope that this missive finds you well. Cheers.
For escalation in fights in elephants, see pool 1984. Yes, I actually ordered that book just so I can look at that example. However, hello Luxa, it is after class, and I've got report. So, a lot of groups in there, but as day one pressed, you know, it's you, a new group, maybe somebody you know, maybe somebody you don't. I knew no one, so made some friends and made some enemies in the process. So, when I first heard about fights in elephants, immediately my thinking had to do with the emotional intelligence of an elephant, especially with one in a huge ego one would normally find in an acting venue. At least it feels that way, where someone feels entitled to be a professional. And there were a few people who were just like right out the gate, had that mentality, gotta look at my silly ass, and made their immediate assumptions. We do not wish to associate with this person. Or acknowledge anything else. Just, yay, toxic positivity. I see you. But I do believe your initial response to Ganesha, I hope I'm saying that right. Ganesha? I'm looking at it right now. Ganesha, God. But yes, road blocker, road opener, the god of new beginnings. And that actually is more apt to what happened, so forth. Because throughout this period, nobody likes me. However, I'm getting good comments, I'm getting good notes, and I happen to make a few other bookings. But a lot of good things, a lot of good blessings, and it's put me in a more emotional state where I can cheer anybody on, even if they don't like what I've got to bring to the table. But I have this habit to relay outcomes just for the sake of, hey, it's done. What can we collect? Here's the data. So that's my approach. I hope. Thank you for your reading. I hope to contribute more to the Green Mushroom. I'm in and out of there, as is, between all the other Discord channels I'm in where it's related to my acting or personal interests, such as chaos. Yes! But, yeah, with that, have a good weekend and enjoy the rest of your week.
All right, thanks to Zed not only for the support, but also for reporting back on how things went. I thought some of what came up there might be pretty relatable content, so I hope you all enjoyed it. And I also share Zed's approach about liking to have some data as well. So I got a great question about how I conduct my bibliomancy readings and my roll table and all of that, which I'll actually need to get into some philosophical territory in order to answer. So I'm going to save that for the next episode in the mailbag segment. But thanks so much to Will for sending that excellent question. All right, hell yeah. If you would like to send me thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod. Thanks to everybody who's reached out and who's been supporting the show by rating, reviewing, and giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Whether or not what you sent was featured, know that all of the missives I receive are appreciated. Check the show notes for a link to get tickets to Kink School, the online BDSM education convention where me and my friend Damien Agony will be teaching a class about sigils and sex magic this November the 23rd of our Year of Our Lady 2024. I'll be leading a club every third Wednesday evening for a while on the Green Machine Discord server called Subversive Book Club. We're beginning with the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson, followed by The Gate to Women's Country by Sherry S. Tepper, which is a book that has some pretty messed up stuff in it that I need help unpacking, but there's also some really interesting magical stuff in there as well. It's a lot, so it'll be interesting to see what people think. So we're going to be finishing up the first book in the Illuminatus trilogy, The Eye in the Pyramid, on October 9th. So go ahead and read that if you haven't already, or come and check it out even if you didn't get to the reading. Everybody's welcome. We've got a lot of other cool stuff going on the Green Machine server, including a rune study group and some fun online rituals and stuff that we have coming up here. Things have grown and changed a lot since we kicked off the project back in 2020, which is definitely to be expected, especially when working with a biological metaphor. Here, the relationship between some fungi and some plants. The idea that if we, the practitioners involved in the project, are like a stand of trees, the green mushroom hyphosigil current connects us and allows us to share resources and information in a way which is mutually beneficial to all. The connection with chthonic currents, or death, symbolized by the mycelial web of a fungal organism, as well as the fact that many fungi are saprotrophs, meaning that they eat dead stuff, basically, makes the mushroom a great ally for those who wish to work with death and necromantic energies. The connection with the celestial realm, as symbolized by the spores produced by fungi, many of which can remain viable even in the vacuum of space, also makes the mushroom a good ally for those who wish to work with that type of stuff as well. Planetary energies and things like that are where my mind goes with that, but there's a lot of different ways to think about it. We actually have something called the Mycocultus working, which explores this and more. It's a sort of like mushroom reskin of some basic kind of tech that you would see in a lot of different orders. And this is something that Dave Ardrey from the National Order of Druids in America and also Unearthing Paranormalcy podcast put together with the help of a whole team of proofreaders and test pilots and others. And which also features gorgeous art from T. Grady, aka Mirth and Woe on Instagram. As I said, you can check that out on our website or our Discord server. And we also have a bonus episode of it in which I talk with Dave Ardrey about it. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you in your practice. I will now read the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance, which, as regular listeners know, is one of the customs I like to follow here on this show. People involved in the project also light a candle with the green mushroom sigil every Friday night at midnight Eastern, when we remind ourselves to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Cressida Stone and to Zephod for joining me, and to Zed for the report back. Check out the show notes for links to Secrets of Santa Muerte and all the things that we talked about today. Thanks so much for all the kind words and support about the show and my other work. There's some really fun stuff on the horizon that I'm really stoked about, including some pretty rad content coming your way. I appreciate all the help and support from both seen and unseen sources, Gratitude Void and Team Unseen. And respectful thanks also to Santa Muerte for her apparent intervention in the creation of this episode, to Lord Ganesh, and to the mighty, mighty Hecate. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Alright, I'm going to leave you all with the first few minutes of the title track from the first album I put out, Gratis Animus. Thank you for letting me do
Gratitude for guiding me to where I go now willingly from my own volition and power and boldness. Thank you for showing me the thought of the web, consuming the corpse of one of Thank you. Thank you for placing the keys in my hand. I survived tables. Maybe hypnotize myself. Resist gratitude. Resist by maintaining sovereignty. From there, resist by maintaining love of self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love. I just started trying to connect. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path. More better times. The older places in the brain. So, as I started to go to sense for the chairs, I have a question. Such immature worship. My journal worship. It's just listening to shit.
Lux Occult is a part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Hey, what's up? I'm Luxa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah.